Elijah Brooks was 42 years old, and most people who met him assumed they understood him within the first 5 minutes. He drove a 7-year-old Chevy Tahoe with a faint scratch along the passenger door. He wore the same simple silver watch every day. He kept his voice low, held doors open for strangers, tipped 20% even when service was slow, and knew how to fix a leaking sink without calling anyone. In Atlanta, where people measured success by what you parked, posted, or wore into a room, Elijah had built a life that looked almost too ordinary to respect. That had always been part of the problem. Every morning before the wedding week, he woke at 5:30, made black coffee in the quiet kitchen, answered emails at the counter while the neighborhood was still dark, and checked on the small things other men overlooked: the porch light, the trash bins by the curb, the old toolbox in the garage, the calendar Naomi Carter kept on the refrigerator with gold stickers marking bridal appointments and family dinners. He had loved the calm of those mornings. He had loved the idea that a man did not need applause to be steady. Naomi used to say that was what made him different. Her family used to say it made him small. The Carters had never said it plainly at first. Not in front of Naomi. Not in words sharp enough to accuse. Raymond Carter would glance at Elijah's Tahoe in the driveway and ask if he had considered upgrading. Denise Carter would smile across dinner and mention that Naomi had grown up around a certain standard. Tasha, Naomi's younger sister, was less careful. She liked to laugh when Elijah talked about quiet weekends, home-cooked meals, or fixing things himself. "You're so simple," she once said, raising her wineglass like it was a compliment. Elijah had smiled because Naomi had squeezed his knee under the table, because he believed patience was part of love, and because there were some rooms where silence told you more than speaking ever could. By the morning of the wedding, Magnolia Crest Estate looked like something pulled from a magazine: white roses climbing the archway, polished stone floors reflecting soft gold chandeliers, champagne flutes lined up in perfect rows, and a long aisle cutting through the ballroom like a promise. Elijah stood in a private hallway behind the ceremony doors, dressed in a black tuxedo that fit him better than anyone in that building would have expected. The air smelled like lilies, expensive perfume, and fresh varnish from the ballroom floor. Somewhere beyond the wall, a string quartet practiced the same 8 measures over and over again. He should have felt nervous. Instead, he felt still. Then he heard Raymond Carter's voice. It came from the other side of the half-open door near the family waiting area, smooth and amused, the voice of a man who believed every room belonged to him. "Naomi is marrying potential, not success," Raymond said. "There's a difference." A few people chuckled. Elijah did not move. His hand stayed on his cufflink. Then Tasha answered, bright and cruel, "Potential? Daddy, he's 42. That's just a polite word for loser." The word settled into the hallway harder than it should have. Loser. Not whispered. Not accidental. Said with the easy confidence of people who had practiced disrespect so long they no longer heard it as ugly. Something felt wrong, but not surprising. That was what hurt most. Elijah looked at the polished glass panel beside him and saw his own reflection staring back, calm face, straight shoulders, dark eyes giving away nothing. Behind him, Malcolm Hayes stood near the wall in his best man's tuxedo, one hand resting inside his jacket where Elijah had seen him place a black envelope earlier that morning. Malcolm did not speak. He only watched Elijah through the reflection, waiting. Before we go deeper into what he discovered that day, tell us where you're watching from and do not forget to subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. Elijah breathed once, slow and measured. He remembered Denise correcting the wording on the invitations because Brooks did not sound established enough. He remembered Raymond offering to introduce him to real business people after the honeymoon. He remembered Naomi laughing softly when Tasha joked that Elijah was lucky she had charity in her heart. Each memory clicked into place like a lock finding its key. Then he saw Naomi. She stood at the far end of the hallway in her wedding dress, close enough to have heard every word. Her bouquet trembled slightly in her hands. Elijah waited for her to say something, anything, even his name. She looked at him, then toward the family room, then back again. Her voice came low, almost pleading. "Please don't make this awkward today." Elijah felt the sentence land deeper than the insult. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her hand, at the ring he had placed there, at the white roses behind her, at Malcolm's reflection and the black envelope still tucked inside his jacket. And for the first time that morning, Elijah understood that the wedding had not begun yet, but something else already had. Naomi Carter stood in the hallway looking like every photograph Elijah had once imagined would hang in their home. The dress was elegant without being loud, fitted through the waist, soft at the shoulders, the kind of white that seemed to catch every bit of morning light coming through the tall windows of Magnolia Crest Estate. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair was pinned in a way that made her look calm from a distance. But Elijah was close enough to see the small things. The tightness around her mouth. The shallow rise of her chest. The way her fingers pressed into the stems of the bouquet until one white rose bent slightly out of place. She had heard them. He knew she had heard them because her eyes did not carry confusion. They carried discomfort, and discomfort was not the same as surprise. Elijah waited one more second than he should have. He gave her that second because love had trained him to be generous with silence. In 8 months of planning the wedding, he had watched Naomi bend herself around her family so often that he had started to mistake it for loyalty. Raymond wanted the estate because it looked good in photographs, so Naomi agreed. Denise wanted the guest list expanded to include people Naomi barely knew, so Naomi agreed. Tasha wanted a content team to capture the full experience, so Naomi agreed. Every time Elijah asked whether any of it still felt like their wedding, Naomi would touch his arm and say, "It is just one day." Now that one day had arrived, and the same sentence was sitting in her eyes. Just get through it. Just stay quiet. Just let them have this. He looked past her toward the family room. Raymond's laugh came again, lower this time, followed by the soft clink of glass. The sound carried down the hallway and mixed with the music from the ballroom, making the whole place feel strangely divided, half celebration, half warning. Naomi stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Elijah, please. They are nervous. Daddy gets like this when he is emotional." Elijah studied her face. He wanted to find anger there. Not at him, but for him. He wanted to see even one clean line of defense, one sign that she understood the difference between a family being difficult and a family being cruel. But she kept looking over her shoulder as if the real danger was not what they had said, but whether he might respond to it. That was the second cut. He nodded once, not because he agreed, but because he had learned long ago that a nod could keep a door open while the truth gathered itself on the other side. Naomi seemed relieved by the movement. She reached for his hand, her thumb brushing the edge of his cuff. "After today, everything will be different," she whispered. Elijah looked down at her hand on his sleeve. The diamond on her finger flashed under the chandelier light, bright enough to look almost cold. He remembered the night he proposed on the back porch of his modest house in Atlanta, with rain ticking against the gutters and takeout containers on the kitchen counter because the restaurant had lost their reservation. Naomi had cried then, not loudly, not for show. She had pressed her forehead to his and said she wanted peace more than performance. He had believed her. He still remembered the warmth of that belief. But the detail did not match. The woman who once said she wanted peace was now asking him to swallow humiliation so her family could keep performing. Elijah did not pull away sharply. He simply let his hand lower until hers slipped from his sleeve. Naomi noticed. Her eyes flicked to his, searching his face for a reaction he would not give her. He could hear Malcolm shift behind him, one quiet movement against the wall. Not interference. Not pressure. Just presence. Elijah had always appreciated that about Malcolm. His friend never stepped into silence unless invited. The ceremony coordinator appeared at the end of the corridor with a headset tucked behind one ear and a clipboard hugged to her chest. "We are ready for the groom," she said softly, smiling the practiced smile of someone paid to protect beautiful moments from ugly ones. Elijah glanced at Naomi. She looked relieved again, as if timing itself had rescued them. He adjusted his cufflink, feeling the cool metal under his thumb. He did not know yet exactly what the rest of the day would become. He only knew what had already been revealed. Naomi had not defended him when the insult was private. In a few minutes, there would be 300 people watching. He wondered, quietly and without panic, what she would do when the humiliation became public. Elijah stepped through the ceremony doors with the same quiet pace he used every morning when he walked from his kitchen to the driveway, coffee in one hand, work bag in the other, the world still dark enough to feel honest. That was the version of him the Carters believed they knew. A steady man. A useful man. A man who could repair a loose cabinet hinge, carry folding chairs after family dinners, and wait patiently while people with louder voices decided where he fit. In their minds, Elijah Brooks belonged in the background. He had allowed them to think that because he had never believed love should require a resume. His life in Atlanta had been simple on purpose. His house sat on a quiet street shaded by old oaks, not behind gates or guarded walls. The front porch had 2 black rocking chairs and a small table where Naomi used to leave her tea when she came over after work. The kitchen had butcher block counters he had sanded and sealed himself one long Saturday in July. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil, cedar, and grass clippings from the mower he refused to replace because it still started on the second pull. Nothing in that house shouted. That was why Elijah loved it. It gave him room to breathe. Most evenings, before the wedding planning swallowed their calendar, he cooked dinner while Naomi sat at the island scrolling through venue photos, floral ideas, and messages from her mother. He would season salmon, wash collard greens, and listen as she described what Denise wanted, what Raymond expected, what Tasha thought would look good online. Sometimes Elijah would ask, gently, "What do you want?" Naomi would smile without looking up and say, "I want everyone to be happy." At first, he thought that was kindness. Later, he began to wonder if it was fear wearing kindness as a dress. The Carters had mistaken his restraint for lack of ambition from the beginning. Raymond asked him once, over bourbon he barely touched, what his 5-year plan was. Elijah had answered honestly enough to sound unimpressive. Build quietly. Keep people employed. Make decisions I can live with. Raymond had stared at him for 2 seconds too long, then smiled the way men smile when they have decided not to take another man seriously. Denise liked details she could display, job titles, family names, neighborhoods, club memberships. Elijah gave her none of those things. Tasha once filmed his Tahoe in the driveway and joked that Naomi was marrying for character, not comfort. Elijah had seen the video before she deleted it. He had not mentioned it. He had simply filed it away with all the other small moments that told him what people revealed when they thought there would be no consequences. Now, as he walked toward the front of the ballroom, those memories followed him under the chandelier light. Guests turned in their seats. Some smiled warmly. Others gave him the quick appraising glance he had learned to recognize: shoes, watch, posture, then judgment. The aisle stretched ahead of him, lined with white roses and candles floating in glass cylinders. Beyond the first row, Raymond stood near the family section with his hands folded, his expression polished for witnesses. Denise dabbed one eye with a folded tissue though Elijah saw no tears. Tasha held her phone low, angled just enough to capture him without making it obvious. He kept walking. He stayed silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because silence had always been the cleanest way to hear the truth around him. At the front, Malcolm took his place beside him. The black envelope was no longer visible, but Elijah knew it was there. He could feel the weight of it in the space between them, quiet and patient, like a door that had not opened yet. The music shifted. The room rose. Naomi appeared at the far end of the aisle, beautiful enough to make the whole ballroom inhale at once. Elijah looked at her, searching again for the woman from the rain-soaked porch, the woman who once said peace mattered more than performance. For 1 second, he thought he saw her. Then her eyes flicked past him to her father before they came back to his face, and the detail did not match. The vows passed through the ballroom like something delicate trying to survive heavy hands. Elijah heard the officiant speak about patience, devotion, and choosing each other in public and in private. He heard Naomi repeat the words in a voice soft enough to make several guests lean forward. He repeated his own with steady breath, each promise leaving his mouth cleanly, each one landing against the strange weight in his chest. Nothing about the ceremony broke on the surface. The music swelled at the right moment. The guests clapped at the right moment. Naomi smiled at the right moment. And still, Elijah felt the split beneath it all, the thin line between what everyone saw and what he had already heard. After the ceremony, the Carters became a performance of warmth. Raymond hugged him in front of the cameras, one hand firm between Elijah's shoulders, his smile broad enough for the photographer. "Welcome to the family, son," Raymond said, loud enough for the first 2 rows to hear. The word son sounded polished, not felt. When the camera turned away, Raymond's hand dropped immediately. He stepped back and adjusted his cufflinks, gold catching the light. Denise kissed Elijah's cheek with perfume and powder brushing his skin, then turned to someone behind her and said, "We made the best of it." Elijah heard it because she was close enough to be careless. He did not look at her. He looked at the marble floor, at the reflection of her heels moving away, and placed that sentence beside the others. "We made the best of it." The Carters had always lived that way, arranging reality until it looked respectable from a distance. Their house in Buckhead had framed degrees on the walls, fresh flowers in every room, and a dining table large enough to seat people they wanted to impress more than people they loved. Elijah had been there enough times to understand the rhythm. Raymond spoke in announcements, not conversations. Denise corrected stories until they sounded more expensive. Tasha treated every family gathering like content waiting to be edited. Around them, Naomi became quieter, brighter, more careful. She laughed faster at jokes that were not funny. She touched Elijah's arm whenever silence became risky. She moved through her family's expectations like a woman who knew where every loose floorboard was and still refused to leave the house. At first, Elijah had thought they were simply protective. Then he noticed the patterns. Raymond never asked Elijah what he did in a way that invited a real answer. He asked in front of other men, usually after listing somebody else's accomplishments. Denise introduced Elijah as Naomi's fiancé, but introduced everyone else with titles, firms, and neighborhoods. Tasha called him humble in a tone that turned the word into something small. None of it was dramatic enough to confront. That was the problem with quiet disrespect. It survived by pretending to be manners. The reception room opened before them in gold and glass. Tall centerpieces rose from every table. Champagne moved on silver trays. A jazz trio played near the far wall under a wash of amber light. Guests stood in clusters, smiling, whispering, glancing. Elijah saw men from Raymond's business circle in tailored suits, women Denise knew from charity boards, cousins, church friends, college friends, and people Naomi had not mentioned until the guest list grew past 250. This was not a celebration anymore. It was an audience. Naomi slipped her arm through his as they entered, her grip just tight enough to guide him, not hold him. "Just smile," she whispered without moving her lips much. Elijah did smile. Not because she asked. Because he wanted to see who relaxed when he did. Across the room, Raymond lifted his glass toward a group of men near the bar, then nodded in Elijah's direction. One of them looked over, gave a small grin, and said something Elijah could not hear. The group laughed softly. Naomi's fingers tightened around his arm. She had heard enough to know it was not kind. She kept walking. That was the third cut. At the head table, Tasha leaned close while pretending to adjust a place card. "Big day for you, Elijah," she said, her phone already in her hand. Not every man gets to marry up in front of this many witnesses. Elijah turned his eyes to her slowly. He did not answer. Tasha's smile held for a second, then thinned. A man who defended himself too quickly gave people something to edit. Elijah knew better. He pulled out Naomi's chair, waited until she sat, then took his own seat beneath the chandelier light. Malcolm sat 2 chairs away, quiet as ever, watching the room instead of the stage. The black envelope was still somewhere inside his jacket. Elijah had not asked about it. He did not need to. The first course arrived on white plates with gold rims. Raymond stood near the microphone, speaking with the coordinator, one hand resting on the stand like he had been waiting all day to claim it. Elijah looked at Naomi. Her eyes were fixed on her father. Not proud exactly. Not afraid exactly. Something in between. The detail did not match. Then Raymond tapped the microphone once, and every conversation in the room began to die. The sound of Raymond Carter tapping the microphone brought Elijah back to the same polished confidence he had heard that morning, hours before the ceremony, when the estate was still quiet and the ballroom smelled of fresh flowers not yet warmed by bodies. It had happened in a private sitting room off the east corridor, a room with cream walls, blue velvet chairs, and tall windows looking over the lawn where workers were still straightening rows of white chairs. Elijah had been buttoning his shirt when Malcolm stepped in and told him Raymond wanted 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Raymond had said, like he was asking for a favor too small to refuse. But when Elijah entered the sitting room, Denise was already there with a leather folder on her lap, Naomi stood near the window with her arms folded, and a man Elijah had never met sat at a small oak table with a pen placed neatly beside a stack of papers. The detail did not match. Family conversations did not usually come with witnesses and legal tabs. Raymond smiled as if everyone had gathered for coffee. Just a little housekeeping before the big moment, he said. Nothing personal. Elijah looked at the folder, then at Naomi. She would not quite hold his eyes. Morning light came through the window and touched the side of her face, making her look softer than the room felt. Her dress was not on yet. She wore a silk robe with her initials stitched on the sleeve, a gift from Denise, and her hair was pinned halfway up. She looked beautiful and far away. Raymond explained that the Carters believed in clarity, that successful families protected what had taken generations to build, that marriage was love, of course, but love should never make intelligent people careless. Denise nodded through every sentence. Naomi looked at the lawn. Elijah listened without interrupting. He had learned that people revealed more when they believed they were educating him. The man at the table slid the documents forward and introduced himself as an attorney who handled private family matters. Elijah noticed the phrase, how cleanly it avoided saying whose interests he served. The agreement was thick, marked with yellow tabs, the pages crisp and expensive beneath Elijah's fingers. Raymond kept talking while Elijah read. This is not about mistrust, he said. It is about protecting Naomi. Protecting Naomi. Elijah turned a page slowly. The agreement listed Carter family property, Carter business interests, future inheritances, gifts, accounts, and social obligations written in language polished enough to hide the insult inside it. The message was simple. They thought Elijah had nothing, and they wanted the nothing documented. Naomi finally stepped closer and lowered her voice. It is just paperwork, Elijah. Daddy insisted. Please do not make today harder than it needs to be. There it was again. That quiet request for him to make himself smaller so the day could stay beautiful. Elijah looked at the pen on the table. He looked at Raymond's gold watch. He looked at Denise's expression, patient and superior, like she was waiting for a child to understand adult matters. Then he asked for a few minutes to review the language privately. Raymond laughed once, not loudly, but enough. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need. He did not mean it. Elijah took it anyway. Malcolm came in after the others stepped out, closing the door with a soft click. He said nothing at first. He simply stood beside the window while Elijah read every page. The room was silent except for distant chairs scraping across stone outside and the low hum of the air conditioning. Halfway through, Elijah found the opening. Not a mistake exactly. An assumption. The document protected the Carters from what they believed he wanted, but it did not protect them from what they were doing. Elijah took the pen and wrote one additional clause in careful block letters on the final amendment page, then initialed beside it. Malcolm read it once, and his face changed only slightly. "You are sure?" he asked. Elijah capped the pen. "If nobody plans to humiliate anybody, it should not matter." When Raymond returned, Elijah signed first. Naomi signed after him, barely glancing at the amendment. Raymond signed with the relaxed confidence of a man who thought the trap belonged to him. Now, seated beneath the chandelier as Raymond stood at the microphone in front of 300 guests, Elijah remembered the weight of that pen in his hand. He remembered Naomi not reading the final page. He remembered Malcolm folding a copy into the black envelope. Raymond smiled out at the room, lifted his champagne glass, and began to speak. Malcolm Hayes had known Elijah Brooks for 21 years, long enough to understand that silence did not mean surrender. They had met as freshmen in a cramped dorm lounge at Morehouse, two young men with too much discipline for boys their age and not enough money to pretend college was easy. Elijah had worked nights at a shipping warehouse off Fulton Industrial Boulevard, then come back before sunrise with dust on his boots and accounting textbooks under his arm. Malcolm had watched him sleep through alarms, wake on the third buzz, wash his face in cold water, and show up to class like exhaustion was just another bill to pay on time. Back then, Elijah already had the quality the Carters had mistaken for weakness. He did not announce himself. He built. Quietly. Carefully. Completely. That morning, when Malcolm stepped into the sitting room and saw the prenup spread across the oak table, he did not ask Elijah whether he was angry. The answer was in the way Elijah turned the pages. Slow. Exact. No wasted motion. Malcolm read over his shoulder when Elijah found the language that treated him like a man arriving empty-handed to claim another family's life. He saw the insult buried beneath legal courtesy. He also saw the opening Elijah saw. That was why Malcolm had taken the final signed copy and folded it into the black envelope. Not dramatically. Not like a threat. Like a man putting a receipt where it belonged. By the time the ceremony ended, Malcolm had already noticed more than enough. He noticed the way Raymond performed affection only when cameras turned toward him. He noticed Denise saying, "We made the best of it," as if Elijah had been an unfortunate weather condition. He noticed Tasha recording moments that made Elijah look alone and avoiding moments that made him look dignified. He noticed Naomi hearing enough to intervene and choosing smoothness instead. None of that surprised Malcolm, but he did not move early. Moving early gave people room to deny. Waiting gave the truth room to reveal itself. Elijah understood that too. At the head table, Malcolm sat with his water glass untouched and his phone face down beside his plate. From where Elijah sat 2 chairs away, he could see the edge of the black envelope inside Malcolm's jacket each time his friend shifted. It was not the only thing Malcolm carried. Elijah knew there was a flash drive in the inner pocket, a printed ownership summary, a clean copy of the amendment, and the name of Victor Langston written on a card Malcolm had checked twice before the ceremony. Elijah had not asked him to bring all of it into the ballroom. Malcolm had done it because he knew the Carters. Not personally, not deeply, but enough. Men like Raymond believed paperwork only mattered when it served them. Families like the Carters believed public rooms protected them because polite people hated disruption. Malcolm had spent his career around boardrooms full of that kind of confidence. He knew how quickly it thinned when documentation entered the room. Raymond's voice rolled over the microphone, warm and rich, practiced for donors, lenders, and people he wanted impressed. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here to celebrate my daughter Naomi," he began. The room softened around him. Glasses lifted. Cameras tilted. Naomi sat straighter beside Elijah, her smile appearing almost before the first sentence finished. Elijah watched her profile in the chandelier light and wondered how many times she had learned to smile before knowing what came next. Raymond spoke about family legacy, about standards, about the importance of building a name that meant something. Every sentence sounded harmless from a distance. Up close, Elijah could hear the turn coming. Malcolm heard it too. Elijah saw his friend's fingers rest lightly against the jacket where the envelope waited. Not yet. That was the message in the stillness. Let him speak. Let the room hear it cleanly. Raymond turned slightly toward Elijah, his smile widening by half an inch. Now, I will admit, he said, and the room gave him the small laugh people offer powerful men before they understand the joke. When Naomi first brought Elijah home, I had questions. Elijah felt Naomi's hand move under the table, searching for his. He did not take it. Malcolm lowered his eyes to the table for 1 second, then looked back at Raymond. Everything in the room seemed to narrow around the microphone, the champagne glass, and the black envelope waiting in silence. The ballroom had been designed to make every moment look expensive. Gold light poured down from the chandeliers and scattered across the polished floor. White roses climbed tall glass vases at the center of every table. Champagne moved from hand to hand on silver trays, catching reflections from diamond earrings, cufflinks, and camera lenses. The jazz trio near the far wall softened into something slower as Raymond Carter held the microphone, and for a few seconds, Magnolia Crest Estate felt less like a wedding venue and more like a stage built for one man's performance. Elijah watched it all from the head table. He watched the way people leaned toward Raymond before he had even said anything important. He watched the way Denise lifted her chin, already proud of whatever was coming. He watched Tasha angle her phone just below the flowers, close enough to record without looking obvious. He watched Naomi keep her smile in place with the discipline of someone holding a glass too full to spill. Every detail mattered. The candles. The cameras. The people who had not come to bless a marriage so much as witness a family presentation. Elijah had been in polished rooms before, though none of the Carters knew that. He knew how confidence changed the air when money believed it had witnesses. He knew how public kindness could become private cruelty with nothing more than a turned shoulder and a lowered voice. But this room was different because Naomi was beside him, because her hand had searched for his under the table, because he had not taken it, and because she had noticed. Something in her posture tightened after that. Not enough for the guests to see. Enough for Elijah to know she felt the distance. Raymond continued speaking, each sentence coated in charm. He talked about Naomi as a little girl with big dreams, about Carter standards, about the kind of future a father hopes his daughter will choose. People smiled. Some nodded. A woman near the front dabbed her eye with a napkin. Elijah heard the words, but he listened harder to what lived beneath them. The message was coming slowly, dressed as affection. Raymond was not simply giving a toast. He was arranging the room before delivering the insult. Elijah looked toward the far windows where dusk had settled over the estate lawn. Beyond the glass, the driveway lamps had begun to glow, one by one, casting warm circles over the stone path and the valet stand. He remembered arriving that morning through the service gate, at his own request, in the Tahoe the Carters liked to pity. He remembered the valet hesitating for half a second before taking the keys. He remembered 2 guests near the entrance looking at the truck, then at him, then away. None of it had wounded him. Not alone. Small things rarely did. But enough small things, placed in the right order, became a map. Naomi leaned closer without turning her head. "He is just emotional," she whispered. The words were meant to soothe. They did the opposite. Elijah did not answer. He kept his eyes on Raymond. Around them, forks rested on plates. Conversations faded. The room gave itself over to the microphone. Raymond smiled directly at him now, and that smile carried the easy danger of a man certain he could humiliate someone and still be called gracious for it. I will be honest, Raymond said. When Naomi told us about Elijah, I wondered whether she was choosing beneath what she deserved. A soft, uncertain laugh moved through the room. Not everyone joined it, but enough did. Elijah felt Naomi's breath catch beside him. She did not stand. She did not speak. She only reached again for his hand beneath the table, more urgently this time, as if touch could replace courage. He let his hand remain where it was, resting beside the folded napkin. Raymond lifted his glass a little higher. But marriage teaches us all humility. Sometimes a man does not need to bring much to the table if he is grateful for the seat. The room went still in pieces. First the front tables. Then the family section. Then the bar. Elijah heard one quiet laugh from somewhere behind him, followed by a sharper whisper telling someone to stop. He looked at Naomi, giving her the final space to become who he had hoped she was. Her eyes shone under the chandelier light, but they stayed on her father. Her lips parted. For 1 second, Elijah believed she might speak. Then she leaned toward him and whispered, "Please. Let him finish." That was when the room changed. Not because Raymond had finished the insult, but because Naomi had finished something else. Elijah sat back slowly. Malcolm Hayes, 2 chairs away, moved for the first time. His hand went inside his jacket, and the black envelope slid into view against the white tablecloth. Raymond Carter did not see the black envelope at first. His attention belonged to the room, to the faces turned toward him, to the fragile power of a microphone in a beautiful place. Elijah saw the envelope, though. He saw Malcolm's fingers rest against its edge, not opening it, not lifting it, only making sure it was there. That small movement steadied him more than any speech could have. Documentation had a different kind of weight. It did not need to raise its voice. Raymond mistook the silence for permission. He smiled as if the soft discomfort in the room amused him, as if he had expected resistance and was pleased to find none. "Now, do not misunderstand me," he said, spreading one hand with the practiced ease of a man who had chaired non-profit dinners and investor breakfasts. "Elijah seems like a decent man. A quiet man. A man who knows how to stay in his lane." A few guests shifted in their seats. Someone set a fork down too carefully. The clink against the plate sounded louder than it should have. Elijah did not look around. He kept his gaze on Raymond and let the words arrive. A decent man. A quiet man. Stay in his lane. The phrases were polished enough to pass as compliments to anyone who did not know how contempt dressed for formal events. Naomi sat beside him with her hands clasped in her lap now, her bouquet placed on the table like a white apology nobody had spoken. Elijah could feel her watching his profile, waiting for some sign of anger, embarrassment, anything she could manage. He gave her nothing. The ballroom lights warmed the side of his face. The champagne in front of him had gone untouched. Raymond turned slightly, bringing more of the room into his performance. "Every father dreams of a certain future for his daughter," he continued. "You imagine stability. You imagine leadership. You imagine a man who walks into a room and the room understands who he is." The insult became clearer then, not hidden anymore, only softened by ceremony. Elijah heard a low laugh from one of Raymond's business friends near the front. Not loud. Not long. Just enough to confirm that some people understood the joke and were comfortable being seen understanding it. Denise looked down at her napkin, but her mouth did not lose its shape. Tasha held her phone steady, screen glowing faintly behind the centerpiece. Elijah wondered which part she planned to post. The humble groom. The generous father. The family joke. The beautiful lie. Raymond lifted his glass again, and the chandelier light fractured through it. But life surprises us. Sometimes our children choose differently. Sometimes they choose character over achievement. Another ripple moved through the room, thinner this time. Some guests smiled because they did not know what else to do. Others stared at their plates. The jazz trio had stopped playing completely. In the far corner, the wedding coordinator stood frozen with both hands around her clipboard, her professional smile gone. Elijah noticed all of it. He had always noticed rooms. He noticed who laughed first. Who looked away. Who pretended not to hear. Who enjoyed another person being reduced in public because it made them feel safer in their own ranking. Raymond's voice warmed, which somehow made it worse. So tonight, I ask all of you to raise a glass, not only to Naomi, who has always deserved the finest things in life, but to Elijah, who should be grateful to spend the rest of his life learning what excellence looks like up close. The room did not laugh this time. It held its breath. Elijah looked at the faces nearest him and saw the exact moment people realized the toast had crossed from awkward to cruel. But Raymond did not seem to feel the floor shift beneath him. He was still smiling. Still certain. Still standing in a room he believed reflected his power back at him. Elijah's chest felt quiet now, almost empty. Not numb. Clear. The last soft part of him that had wanted to excuse the Carters had gone still. Across the table, Malcolm's thumb slid under the flap of the black envelope, then paused. Elijah did not nod. Not yet. He turned his eyes to Naomi one more time. Her face had gone pale beneath the makeup, her lips parted slightly, her eyes bright with panic. Raymond lowered the microphone from his mouth, pleased with himself, and waited for applause. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. The silence after Raymond's toast did not feel empty. It felt full of things people were suddenly afraid to name. Elijah sat beneath the chandelier light with his hands resting on either side of his untouched plate, his face calm enough that several guests looked away from him before he looked away from them. He could hear the faint hum of the climate system above the ballroom. He could hear ice settling inside a glass at the family table. He could hear someone near the bar whisper, "Was that necessary?" and another person say nothing in reply. Raymond still stood at the microphone, his champagne glass lifted, waiting for the room to rescue him with applause. A few hands came together weakly near the back, then stopped when no one joined them. The failure of that applause was the first honest thing the room had given Elijah all evening. Naomi moved beside him. Not much. Just a small turn of her shoulders, a quick breath, the soft brush of satin against the chair. Elijah did not look at her immediately. He looked at the centerpiece instead, at the white roses rising above the table, perfect and scentless under the heat of the lights. He thought about how much effort had gone into making this room beautiful. The flowers flown in. The candles arranged. The place cards written by hand. The custom menu stamped with Naomi's initials beside his. So many people had worked to make the day look flawless, and still the truth had found a way to sit down at the head table. Naomi's hand touched his wrist under the table. This time, he did not pull away. He let her fingers rest there for 1 second, because he wanted to know what came next. He wanted to hear whether her first words after that public humiliation would be for him, or for the room. Her voice came low, trembling at the edges. "Elijah, please do not react. That was not defense. That was management." He turned his eyes to her slowly. Her face was still beautiful, still carefully made for photographs, but the polish had thinned. Her eyes moved between him and her father, then toward the guests, then back to him. She was measuring damage. Not his. Theirs. Elijah felt something quiet close inside him. He did not hate her in that moment. Hate would have been louder, easier, less precise. What he felt was a kind of grief so controlled it barely had a temperature. Naomi leaned closer, her smile trying to stay in place for anyone watching from a distance. "Just let him have this," she whispered. "He paid for everything." The sentence arrived softly, but it landed like a door shutting. Elijah looked at her hand on his wrist. He looked at the wedding band newly placed on his finger. He looked at Raymond still holding the microphone, at Denise staring into her lap, at Tasha with her phone halfway lowered now, uncertain whether she had captured something useful or something dangerous. He looked back at Naomi. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. The words were not loud enough for the table to hear. Naomi blinked. "This is not the time." Elijah almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That had been the language of their entire engagement. Not the time. Not today. Not in front of them. Later. Afterward. When it is easier. When nobody important can hear. He remembered the first dinner at the Carter house when Raymond corrected him about which fork to use for the salad, though Elijah had known and simply reached for the wrong one while answering Denise's question. Naomi had laughed it off. He remembered Tasha asking whether his family would be able to blend in at the reception. Naomi had changed the subject. He remembered Denise suggesting that the wedding photos should focus more on Naomi's side for balance. Naomi had said her mother meant well. Every insult had been given a softer name until softness became another kind of lie. Naomi's fingers tightened around his wrist. "Elijah, I am begging you. Do not embarrass me." There it was. Not "do not let them embarrass you." Not "I am sorry." Not "my father was wrong." Do not embarrass me. Elijah gently lifted her hand from his wrist and placed it back on the white tablecloth. The movement was small. Controlled. Final in a way only he seemed to understand. Across the table, Malcolm saw it. The black envelope lay beneath his palm now, no longer hidden, its dark edge sharp against the linen. Raymond cleared his throat into the microphone, trying to reclaim the room with a laugh that did not quite form. Elijah sat back in his chair, his eyes steady, his voice quiet enough for only Naomi to hear. "You just answered the only question I had left." Malcolm rose from his seat. Malcolm Hayes rose with the kind of calm that made the room pay attention before he said a word. He did not scrape his chair back. He did not throw his napkin onto the table. He simply stood, buttoned his tuxedo jacket with one hand, and lifted the black envelope from the white linen as if it had been waiting there all evening for its proper moment. Elijah watched him without moving. Around the ballroom, guests who had been staring at Raymond now turned toward the best man, grateful for a new place to put their discomfort. Raymond still held the microphone, but his smile had weakened at the edges. "Malcolm," he said, using the friendly tone of a man trying to keep control without showing the effort. "We will get to the best man's speech in a minute." Malcolm looked at him across the head table. "No, sir," he said. "I believe the minute has arrived." The sentence was not loud, but it traveled. A few people near the back shifted in their seats. Someone's phone stopped recording, then started again. Naomi's breath caught beside Elijah, quick and thin. Elijah kept his eyes forward. He had known Malcolm long enough to recognize restraint when he saw it. His friend was not angry in the way the room expected. He was precise. Raymond gave a small laugh into the microphone, trying to turn the interruption into something harmless. "Son, this is family business." Malcolm stepped away from his chair and walked toward the open space near the dance floor. The black envelope rested against his side. His shoes made almost no sound on the polished floor. When he reached Raymond, he did not reach for the microphone. He waited. That waiting did more than a demand would have. Raymond looked at the guests, then at Denise, then back at Malcolm. The silence stretched just long enough to make refusal look strange. Finally, Raymond handed it over with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. Malcolm accepted the microphone and turned to face the room. Elijah saw the exact moment people understood that this would not be a joke. Malcolm did not look at Raymond first. He looked at Naomi. Not cruelly. Not accusingly. Just long enough for her to lower her eyes. Then he looked at Elijah, and something almost like sorrow moved through his face before it disappeared. "I had prepared a different speech," Malcolm began. His voice was steady, clear, built for conference rooms and courtrooms, not performance. It was about friendship. About loyalty. About a man I have known since we were 18 years old, when neither of us had anything but work ethic, student loans, and a belief that character still mattered when nobody was watching. The room stayed still. Elijah felt those words settle somewhere deeper than the insult had. Not because they defended him, but because they remembered him accurately. Malcolm continued. But after what has been said in this room tonight, I cannot give that speech. Not yet. Raymond shifted behind him. Denise's hand moved to the necklace at her throat. Tasha's phone was lifted again, but lower now, as if she was no longer sure whether she wanted the footage. Malcolm looked toward the family table. There is a difference between a toast and a public correction. Mr. Carter gave one. I am here for the other. A murmur moved through the room, soft and nervous. Naomi whispered Elijah's name, but he did not turn. He could feel her fear now, not through touch, but through the air between them. Malcolm held up the black envelope. Before anyone else in this room repeats the idea that Elijah Brooks should be grateful for a seat at this table, there are a few things that need to be understood clearly. Raymond's face hardened, but only slightly. He still believed he could manage this. Elijah saw it and almost pitied him. Malcolm slid one finger under the envelope flap but did not open it yet. I am going to be careful with my words because Elijah has always been careful with his dignity. He has not asked me to embarrass anyone. He has not asked me to raise my voice. He has not asked me to repay disrespect with disrespect. Malcolm paused. The ballroom seemed to lean closer. But truth has its own timing. Elijah looked down at the ring on his finger, then back up at Malcolm. The first real crack had opened, but the room had not yet seen what was behind it. Malcolm opened the black envelope with a silence so clean it seemed to cut through every conversation that had not fully died. He did not rush. He did not perform. He removed a single sheet of paper first, then a small remote no larger than a car key, and placed the envelope on the nearest table as if the room had become an oak conference table and everyone in it had just become part of the record. Elijah watched Raymond's face. That was where the truth would appear first. Raymond still wore the outline of a smile, but it had lost its ease. His eyes followed the paper in Malcolm's hand, then flicked toward the ballroom screen behind the jazz trio, the one that had been used earlier to display childhood photographs of Naomi and engagement pictures beneath scripted music. Malcolm pressed the remote once. The screen went black. A few guests turned in their seats. Naomi whispered, "What is he doing?" Elijah did not answer. The screen filled with a clean document header in dark blue type, Magnolia Crest Estate, Ownership Summary. Elijah felt the room change before anyone spoke. It was not shock yet. It was recognition forming slowly, the way people lean forward when a detail refuses to fit the story they were given. Malcolm stood beside the screen, microphone in one hand, paper in the other. For the sake of clarity, he said, Magnolia Crest Estate is not a Carter family property. It was not donated by one of Mr. Carter's friends. It was not secured through his influence. A quiet sound moved through the guests, not quite a gasp, not quite a whisper. Raymond lowered his champagne glass. Denise looked at the screen, then at Raymond, as if waiting for him to correct something. Malcolm pressed the remote again. A corporate filing appeared below the ownership summary. The name came up sharp and simple beneath the lights, Brooks Meridian Group. Elijah kept his hands still on the table. He could feel Naomi turn toward him, but he did not meet her eyes. Not yet. Malcolm continued, his voice level. This property is owned through Brooks Meridian Group. He paused, letting the sentence settle in a room that had spent the evening measuring Elijah by the wrong instruments. The founder and controlling owner of Brooks Meridian Group is Elijah Brooks. The silence that followed was different from the first. This one had weight. A fork slipped from someone's hand near the third table and struck the plate with a bright, embarrassing sound. Tasha's phone lowered completely. Denise stopped touching her necklace. Raymond did not move at all, but Elijah saw the color shift under his skin, saw the first calculation fail behind his eyes. Naomi's voice came beside him, barely more than air. "Elijah?" He looked at the screen instead of at her. His name stood there in formal print, stripped of apology. Not loud. Not boastful. Just true. Malcolm turned slightly toward Raymond. "The estate where you said he should be grateful for a seat belongs to him. The ballroom where you questioned what he brought to the table belongs to him. The staff, the grounds, the security contract, the lighting, the catering agreement, all of it was approved through the company he controls." Raymond opened his mouth, then closed it. The microphone was no longer in his hand. That mattered. Elijah noticed small things like that. Power often looked different once it had to ask permission to speak. Malcolm did not smile. He did not enjoy the collapse. That was why Elijah trusted him. Elijah did not want that announced tonight, Malcolm said. He asked for a wedding, not a demonstration. But when a man's dignity is challenged publicly, truth should not be required to stay private. The words moved through the room like a slow-turning key. Guests who had laughed earlier now stared at their tables. People who had looked at Elijah's watch, his shoes, his quietness, now looked anywhere but at him. Naomi finally turned fully in her chair. Her bouquet sat untouched beside her plate, white roses already softening at the edges. "You own this place?" she asked. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Elijah met her eyes then. He did not see love first. He saw confusion, fear, and the terrible arithmetic of a woman realizing the story she had defended might not survive the facts. He answered quietly. "Yes." Across the room, Raymond reached for the back of a chair as if adjusting his stance, but Elijah saw his hand tighten around it. Malcolm pressed the remote again, and a second document began to load. The second document opened slowly, line by line, as if the screen itself understood the cruelty of timing. Elijah did not look away from Raymond. He wanted to see whether the man would recognize the header before the room did. Carter Development Group. Emergency Bridge Funding Agreement. The words appeared in clean black type against the white screen, and this time the reaction came faster. A woman at the front table drew in a sharp breath. One of Raymond's business friends leaned back in his chair. Denise turned fully toward her husband, her expression no longer arranged for guests. Raymond's hand stayed on the chair back, but his fingers had gone pale around the polished wood. Malcolm let the room read. He had always known the power of a pause. 6 months ago, he said, Carter Development Group accepted private emergency funding to avoid default on 2 commercial loans tied to unfinished properties in Fulton County and DeKalb County. The ballroom seemed to shrink around the sentence. Elijah heard the air conditioning again, the low mechanical breath above the chandeliers. He heard Naomi whisper, "Daddy," but Raymond did not answer her. Malcolm pressed the remote, and a signature page appeared. Raymond Carter's name sat at the bottom, neat and unmistakable. That funding was provided through a private investment arm of Brooks Meridian Group, Malcolm continued. The same company Mr. Carter mocked tonight. The same man he called unqualified to sit at his table kept that table standing. Nobody moved. Elijah could feel Naomi staring at him now, but his eyes remained on the screen. This was not about spectacle for him. It was about the shape of the truth finally becoming visible. For months, Raymond had looked at Elijah across dinner tables as if evaluating a poor decision. For months, Denise had spoken to him with decorative pity. For months, Tasha had turned his quietness into contempt. And the entire time, the Carter name they guarded so fiercely had been leaning against money they did not know how to respect because they did not know whose hand had extended it. Malcolm lowered the paper in his hand. Elijah did not tell you because he did not want gratitude purchased by leverage. He did not want love that depended on what he owned. He wanted to know who would honor him when they believed he had nothing to offer but himself. The words landed harder than the documents. Elijah felt them, though his face did not change. Naomi's chair shifted beside him. "Elijah," she said, and this time his name sounded different. Smaller. Less certain. He turned just enough to see her. The panic in her eyes had begun to mix with something worse. Realization. Not full understanding yet, but enough to hurt. "You let us think," she began. Elijah's voice stayed quiet. "I let you show me." She closed her mouth. Across the room, the side doors opened with a soft click. Victor Langston entered without hurry, dressed in a dark suit, carrying a slim leather folder. Elijah saw several guests track the movement. Victor did not look like drama. He looked like procedure. That made the room even quieter. Malcolm stepped aside and handed him the microphone. Victor accepted it with the calm of a man who had spent 30 years letting documents speak before emotion could confuse the issue. "My name is Victor Langston," he said. "I represent Mr. Brooks personally and several entities under Brooks Meridian Group. Earlier today, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks signed a prenuptial agreement with an amendment added before execution." Naomi went still. Raymond's head turned sharply. Denise whispered something Elijah could not hear. Victor opened the folder and removed the signed copy. The amendment states that if either party, or an immediate family member acting with the knowledge or passive consent of either party, uses the wedding event to publicly humiliate, materially misrepresent, or financially manipulate the other party, all voluntary spousal concessions, discretionary family support, and non-contractual accommodations connected to the marriage are immediately voidable. The language was formal, but the meaning found everyone. Naomi looked at Elijah as if the floor had moved beneath her. Raymond took one step forward. "Now wait just a minute." Victor did not raise his voice. "Your signature is on page 12, Mr. Carter, acknowledging receipt as a witness to the amendment." Mrs. Brooks signed page 13. Naomi looked down at her hands, then at the white tablecloth, as if the page might appear there and rewrite itself. Elijah remembered the morning light in the sitting room. He remembered the pen. He remembered her not reading. Victor placed the agreement on the head table in front of her. The paper made almost no sound, but Naomi flinched as if it had. For several seconds, the signed agreement lay on the table between them like something heavier than paper. Naomi stared at page 13, her name written in the same elegant hand that had signed the marriage license less than an hour earlier. Elijah watched her read the amendment once, then again, slower the second time, as if careful reading could change what carelessness had already done. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Raymond stood near the microphone with his face stripped of performance. Denise sat perfectly still, one hand at her throat, the other pressed flat against the tablecloth. Tasha had lowered her phone completely. For the first time all day, nobody in the Carter family seemed interested in being recorded. Elijah stood. The movement was quiet, but the entire ballroom followed it. Chairs did not scrape. Glasses did not clink. Even the staff near the service doors had gone still. He looked first at Victor Langston, then at Malcolm, and both men understood without needing instruction. There would be no scene. No shouting. No humiliation repaid in kind. The truth had already done what anger could not. Naomi rose halfway from her chair. "Elijah, please," she said. Her voice shook in a way he had never heard before. "I did not know." He looked at her for a long moment, and what hurt most was that part of him still remembered the porch light at his house, the rain on the gutters, the night she said peace mattered more than performance. He wished that woman had been the one standing beside him when her father lifted the microphone. He wished that woman had spoken before a lawyer had to. "You knew enough," he said. The words were soft, but they carried. Naomi flinched. Raymond took one step toward him, trying to recover the old shape of authority. "Elijah, let us talk about this privately." Elijah turned his eyes to him. "You made it public." Raymond stopped. There was nothing left in the room for him to stand on. Elijah looked back at Naomi. He removed the wedding band slowly, not with anger, not with drama, but with the care of a man setting down something that had once meant something. The ring touched the table beside her champagne glass with a sound so small it seemed to echo anyway. "Today, your family called me a man with little to offer," he said. "But you were the only person here who had the power to make me feel poor. Not because of money. Because I loved you enough to stand quietly and wait for you to choose me." Naomi's eyes filled, but Elijah did not let the sight pull him backward. He had spent months giving softness a chance to become courage. It had chosen comfort every time. Malcolm collected the black envelope. Victor returned the agreement to his folder. Elijah buttoned his jacket and stepped away from the head table. Guests parted without being asked as he walked through the ballroom. No one laughed now. No one whispered loser. The same aisle that had brought him toward Naomi carried him away from her, past the white roses, past the candles, past the beautiful room that had mistaken silence for weakness. Outside, the evening air was cool against his face. Magnolia Crest Estate glowed behind him, all gold windows and polished stone, a palace built for photographs and exposed by one microphone. 6 black sport utility vehicles waited along the circular drive beneath the estate lamps. Their engines idled low, steady, almost gentle. The valet who had hesitated over Elijah's Tahoe that morning now stood with both hands clasped, eyes lowered. Elijah did not look back until he reached the first vehicle. Naomi's voice came from the top of the marble steps. "Elijah." He turned just enough to see her in the doorway, white dress gathered in one hand, face broken open by everything she had learned too late. Behind her, Raymond looked smaller than Elijah had ever seen him. Denise remained inside, seated beneath the chandelier. Tasha stood frozen with her phone dark in her hand. Naomi took one step down. "I am sorry," she said. "I thought," her sentence failed her. Elijah waited, not because he needed the ending, but because he wanted to know whether the truth would finally make her honest. She looked at the cars, at Malcolm, at Victor, then back at him. "I thought they paid for all of this." Elijah nodded once, and that was the final answer. That was the problem. He got into the vehicle. Malcolm closed the door with quiet precision and walked to the next car. As the convoy pulled away from Magnolia Crest Estate, Elijah watched the lights of the mansion slide across the tinted window and disappear behind the trees. He did not feel victorious. Not yet. Victory was too loud a word for what remained. What he felt was dignity returning slowly, like breath after a long time underwater. And behind him, in a ballroom full of witnesses, the Carter family finally understood